My name is Charlie McGrath, founder of WideAwakeNews.com, host on the Rinse Radio Network. 100 years of the Federal Reserve. 100 years, 1913 to 2013. We had presidents, Andrew Jackson, who would rather die than have a central bank in this country. His whole goal, his mission in life as president was to defeat the banks. We've been told, we've been warned throughout history by our founding fathers that if we give the power to private banks to determine the value of money and to issue that money, guess what? We're going to end up slaves in this nation, this once free nation. And that's exactly where we are at. Can you think for 1 second the power that has been amassed at the Federal Reserve? Can you think about that for a second? Ben Bernanke comes out tomorrow and says he's stopping quantitative easing or he's going to raise interest rates. What kind of carnage would that wreak in this country or on this planet? It would be catastrophic. They have built themselves into a position of power, and our government, we the people, have allowed this to happen. Michael Snyder over at the Economic Collapse blog wrote an outstanding article about 100 things about the Federal Reserve. You need to read this article. I'm just going to cover a few of them. The Federal Reserve is set up exactly like a corporation because that's exactly what it is. 12 regional banks make up that ownership. The Federal Reserve issues stocks, and the individuals or the institutions that get to hold these stocks isn't we the people. There's not the government that owns any of this stock. 100% of these shares are issued to its member banks only. Debt. Our debt of our nation has increased not 100, 200, 300%, but 5,000% since the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913. At that time, we also got something called the federal income tax. You see, in 1912, we never had one. Federal Reserve, we get an income tax. The income tax, this tax code that now, if you stretched it out, would be over 13 miles long, thanks to the Federal Reserve. IRS, guess what? Right out of the Federal Reserve. 98% destruction of the value of the dollar. We've received that since 1913 and the creation of the Federal Reserve. The M1 money supply, talk about inflation, talk about where we're headed. In 2008 to present, we've doubled the M1 money supply. The Fed, who tells you what the inflation rate is, says we're, at normal or below normal inflation rates. Yet they cook the books, they report however they want to report, using whatever metric they decide they need to use in order to report what they want to report. And we end up with this lower than average. But if we use the same rates, the same metrics that we did during Jimmy Carter, we'd be at 8 to 10% inflation in this country. Since 1913, we've had 18 recessions or depressions in this country, all created by easy money and the Federal Reserve. We need to remember something. Private banks, when they control the issuance of the money, when they can inflate and then deflate the amount of money in the system, they control booms and busts. They control economic growth and they control economic depression or retraction. In 2008, the Federal Reserve lent out 16 plus, conservatively, 16 plus trillion dollars to a bunch of private banks. We don't get to know all the details of that because it's a private institution giving money to other private institutions that inevitably we, the people, are responsible for. During this time, during the $16 trillion worth of transactions that are secret, 660 million were paid to private banks in fees for them to get this virtually free money. And what have we seen since 2008? A never-ending battle, a never-ending flow of free money coming out of the Federal Reserve. But it isn't going to you or me or we the people. It's going to the banks. It's called quantitative easing. But even their own individuals working for the Fed, their own whistleblowers come out and say this is nothing more than a subsidy for Wall Street. We've even had former members of the Federal Reserve coming out and apologizing to the American people for this bailout for Wall Street. Your income continues to fall, the value of your home, the value of your net worth continues to fall, and all this quantitative easing, trillions of dollars that is being issued is going to a very, very small percentage of individuals in this country. This is why we've seen the largest gap between the rich and the poor, the largest gap in this country since the early 20s. The Federal Reserve, it's not federal, it has no reserves, it's not accountable to we the people. It is a private institution that is issuing the money of this country, and nothing could be any clearer than the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that says we, the people, Congress, will have the ability and will issue currency of this country and determine the value thereof. The Federal Reserve, 100 years is 100 years too many. It's a battle that people such as Ron Paul have been fighting for decades, and we must continue to remember that booms and busts are not normal. Booms and busts are created. They've created bubble after bubble, but this one we're in now, this current global bond bubble, will be the mother of all implosions, the mother of all bursting bubbles. Please read this article by Michael Snyder. I'll attach it to this video. Great stuff. And thank you, Michael, for all the great work you've done over at the Economic Collapse blog. That's all I got.